Watch what's approaching, the supreme moment. Reality striking closer than it seems, don't it? Go ahead, it's for the taking if you want it. If not, the dream dies and you'll be forever haunted. Then confront it.
What's good? Today we're gonna be doing something a little bit different. I was really bored this morning, and I don't know, for whatever reason, it just came across my mind. Let me test out a level 1 SSR non-Dokkan Awakened team and see how they would actually do on a event like Boss Rush. And let me go ahead and tell you, I really had to scale this down. We're in Boss Rush 2, and without, you know, going through too much detail at the very beginning, even within Boss Rush 2, this team really struggled. So I don't know, like I said, this is completely out of boredom. There wasn't really any thought process going into, you know, team building besides, you know, just randomly picking units that linked up relatively well together. And in terms of like items, I could have probably brought in much better items, but I just kind of went with the standardized group of items that I typically bring on, you know, certain runs, you know, when I'm going through events or whatever, you know, not really any sort of strategy behind it. Again, it's completely random. I know it's like, you know, what the hell is this guy doing right now? Probably is more than likely what you guys are thinking, but you know, I just out of curiosity, just level 1 SSR units, nothing invested into not only levels, potential levels, SA, everything is level 1. And the fact that it's non-Dokkan Awakened, units won't have links like Fierce Battle to boost up the attack by 15%, you know, stuff like that. So I did have to bring in a friend lead, which is the Tech Future Trunks. Of course, with the Dokkan Awakened version, you do have 120% towards super type allies. My version of the Tech Trunks obviously is non-Dokkan Awakened, so I would imagine, if I remember correctly, it's 100% toward the boost to HP, attack, and defense, if I'm not mistaken. So outside of that, really just completely random. Of course, I do have Gogeta, Vegito Blue, and, you know, Super Saiyan 4 Gogeta units, stuff like that. Most of these units do have like the Fuse Fighter and stuff like that in terms of link setup. So, you know, of course they do link up fairly well. So didn't really have to worry about much of the rotations. However, as you can see, the amount of damage being applied to the enemy, even in a setting like Boss Rush 2, where nowadays you could pretty much one-shot every single enemy and just plow through it, they're actually struggling quite a bit. So again, this was a nice little fun experiment for me to see how the units do. And, you know, of course, like, because they're not even Z Awakened, they do have like the, you know, type disadvantage equivalent in terms of like damage applied outside of certain units, like the Gogeta that has like effective attack against all types of enemies built into the passive skills. So, you know, outside of that, you are pretty much in a severe handicap setting. And what's kind of funny about this is it actually reminds me of the early, I guess not early, but earlier days of Dokkan Battle, where, you know, the amount of damage being applied to the enemies along with the attack stats are reminiscent of how things were back in the day. You know, we're kind of accustomed and, you know, used to the multi-million, you know, attack stats and damage applied to the enemies. But, you know, believe it or not, for those that are relatively new, you know, that started within, I'd say, the last 2 years, you know, before that time, you know, there was a period where getting 100,000 in attack stats was actually pretty impressive, you know, and along with that, you don't really see it with this team setup necessarily, but during that time, you know, links were also very, very weird, I guess is probably the best way to put it. It wasn't always guaranteed that you would get super attacks with every single unit on the rotation. There was actually surprisingly a time in Dokkan Battle where, you know, you were actually lucky to get 1 super attack per rotation because the link setups were not really optimal and they're not as good as they are right now. So it's a little bit reminiscent of that time. Of course, it's a little bit different in terms of like dynamics of it, but because of some of these units are, you know, on the newer side. Well, I wouldn't say newer, but they're relatively newer in today's state. So again, it's certainly been a little bit of an interesting test, to say the least, because these guys are very, very much so struggling with even clearing an event like Boss Rush 2, where it should be pretty much a cakewalk, you know what I mean? Like I said earlier, this is one of those events you should be able to one-shot the enemies every time and plow through it. But the fact that it's taking this long just to get through the very first stage of Boss Rush 2 is very comical, I guess, in a way. And it's kind of a nice step away from your typical, again, multi-million damage applicable runs, you know, against the enemies. You know, in some cases, like some of these guys, especially if you stack the attack and defense, you know, they're pretty much invincible. But you know, again, it's a nice little step, you know, taking a step back from that sort of setting and just kind of, you know, struggling to get past one event. You know, it's quite amazing how much of a handicap this actually is. But it's obviously a no-brainer because the stats are obviously very, very low at level 1. You don't have the Z Awakened state where, you know, you get type advantage against enemies, you know, if you have units that are applicable in that regard. And then, you know, the potential levels are pretty much non-existent because you do have to get to at least a UR state to be able to apply, you know, the potential orbs. So, you know, with all those combinations taking effect, these guys are at a severe disadvantage setting. And in terms of like team HP, it's only 117,000. And, you know, 117,000 I would say is relatively on the high side if you think about, you know, the back in the day stuff where, you know, I kind of almost remember a time where I think team HP overall was like 60 to 70k, and that was considered pretty good back in those days. And this was obviously before, you know, the 70% monotype leads and further on, you know, 120% and so on. But, you know, back in those days, I think, you know, there was like I don't know, well, like the best way to explain it is like Strength Gogeta was like phenomenal back in the day upon first release, and that unit was, you know, +3 key, and then attack and defense HP +3000 to, you know, the all types, you know, whatever, basically the rainbow lead. And, you know, that was considered a game-breaking leader skill at the time, you know, and that's pretty much how much has changed. Like if you think about it now, we're pretty much accustomed to the 170% leader skills. You know, in some cases all HP attack and defense apply, but in a lot of these cases it's at least like HP or attack or defense, and then 130% for the other components. But, you know, it really does suggest how much the game actually has changed. It's a little bit reminiscent to me of some of the earlier days of Dokkan Battle. That's kind of like when I was going through this earlier, going through the actual run. It did remind me of that quite a bit, and it was a nice little flashback or trip down memory lane a little bit. I guess it's probably the best way to summarize it. Some of you guys watching might be able to I don't know, sympathize or remember the earlier days, but some of you guys might be on the newer side where you kind of missed out on those days. I mean, you know, in the early days of Dokkan, just like any other game that initially comes out and it's in the baby phase of it, you know, there's a lot of issues that come up and nothing's really optimized. And, you know, as more time goes on, the developers and the game itself, you know, figure out better ways to go about it. And that's kind of what you see right now in today's age of going through 5 years of, you know, continuous improvement, and, you know, things just continue to evolve and change. And that's pretty much what you see right now is a more optimized setting of team building and, you know, leader skills and passives and what have you. Like everything is so much more different than, you know, year 1 and even year 2. So again, it's really reminiscent of that time period a little bit because of not only that, but like, you know, difficulty levels are quite reminiscent of it as well. I understand, you know, there are events nowadays with, you know, the Extreme Super Battle Road and even the Legendary Goku event and, you know, additional stages in Infinite Dragon Ball history. Those tend to be a little bit more difficult than some, but you know, if you really think about it, like, you know, flashback to when Extreme, not even Extreme, but Super Battle Road first came out, or Extreme Z Battle first came out, or, you know, Boss Rush 3 came out, like those were pretty difficult at the time. And, of course, because of the mechanics in the game change itself, the difficulty levels have to adjust for that. But it's actually pretty cool to test this out and just kind of get your head wrapped around a time of different settings, I guess is the best way to put it. That's ultimately what this reminded me of, and kind of the overall theme of like the conversation I wanted to talk about in this particular video. I think the footage itself was kind of a nice little run rate of clips and whatnot, but yeah, it's really cool how things have really changed. I mean, like 64,000 in damage applied to enemy. There was a time where that was actually really good. So, that's pretty much the takeaway. And honestly, with this particular run, a lot was relied on the friend lead, because the friend lead was pretty much current. And of course, you can pretty much you see the friend lead one shot the enemy, and that's pretty much what the customary standard is against a much lower difficulty like this. So even though we really had to scale it down in this regard to a point all the way down to Boss Rush 2, which is quite honestly an absolute joke right now. If you bring really good teams, it's pretty much a cakewalk. It's no issue whatsoever. So the fact that this team's struggling, I mean, it's kind of interesting to see it firsthand. I haven't really tested it like this before, so and you can notice I'm using a lot of items here. I obviously could have brought in a lot better items. I understand that, but again, there wasn't really any strategic thoughts or really thought process going into it. It was more or less just jumping in, see how they would do at level 1 SSR rate of non-Dokkan awakened states. So it was honestly a pretty cool test. So hopefully you guys enjoyed it. I don't know, give or take what your thoughts were on it, but hopefully at the end of the day, you guys did enjoy the video. It was a little bit different than some of the typical showcases and whatnot, so I did try to switch it up. So again, thanks for watching, and yeah, as always, definitely stay tuned, and I will catch you guys later.